This is Sybert signing into Kane's Wrath on the map Tournament Dust Bowl 4, an event which is very, very old. That's right, we're kicking it in 1.02 and into the latter Season 3. This is Semifinal A, and of course, in the north, as the Cyan Black Hand, this is v0ddy. While in the south, as the Green Black Hand, this is Technique. Now, as this was one of the biggest events in Command & Conquer history, Ladder Season 3 was pretty much the last official EA tournament for both Kane's Wrath and for Red Alert 3. Lots of prize money. I don't know, they may have run some stuff for Command & Conquer 4, but the point is, this was the last big hurrah from kind of the official time. Now, naturally, after this, we have seen quite a few tournaments from the Command & Conquer community for all sorts of games. But this was certainly a different time, and I myself was not super big into the competitive scene when this happened, so I didn't really follow it too much. I never actually have seen these games, which is why when someone suggested it to me, I thought, yeah, that's actually a neat idea. I'm sure other people have casted these games, and I don't know whether or not they were good or bad. Kind of interestingly, right off the bat, not a lot of times do you actually see people go for, especially in the case of a tournament setting, refinery first in this sort of a game. Naturally, against a guy like Bike Rush, that is probably going to be completely it's almost going to be a build order loss in the fact of if he bike rushes, it's going to be very difficult. In this case, it is, of course, refinery first from both players, which does mean that Technique doesn't have nearly as much to worry about. If this would have been some sort of really hardcore all-in coming out from v0ddy, that would have definitely been a different story. In this particular case, he's lost a couple of bikes, and Technique has pretty much only lost that one harvester, which does put him a bit behind from where he otherwise would have been, but of course it doesn't put him that much further behind. All things considered, I'm definitely excited to take a look at this series. This was, of course, quite a bit of a different time for the game, and you still see guys like Technique. Well, actually, I haven't seen Technique around online for quite some time. I know he was into the gray goo a little bit there, but not so sure about after, or more recently, what he's really been up to. v0ddy, I feel like he's been around a little bit. I'm not actually sure, though. I don't know that he's necessarily been around, like, in the last year. Same with Technique, but both of these guys did definitely play a bit after this particular event, and I'm not sure that they necessarily reached the same heights as they did in this event, although it's hard to say that for sure. Second War Factory going to be coming down for v0ddy, and the same thing for Technique. That is going to be an MCV cell dual War Factory. Now, of course, this is pretty much fully saturated one base economy. I guess if you want to get picky, you could say like, oh, well, you know, 2 harvesters, 2 refineries, or 2 harvesters per refinery isn't technically quite full saturation, but it's pretty darn close, and of course that MCV cell cash boost gives you a decent amount of money. So v0ddy opening up with some bikes earlier on, wasn't quite able to do necessarily, well, he definitely wasn't able to do game-winning damage in this case. By the way, this is a best of 3, kind of an interesting format that they went for Ladder Season 3, is just deciding that both the semis and the finals would be best of 3s, which is quite uncommon, especially in RTS games these days. You typically end up seeing best of 5 semifinals, sometimes best of 7. There's really only one like major tournament that I can think of that does best of 3 semifinals regularly, and then best of 5 finals. But no, back in this time, people were indeed doing best of 3 finals, which is kind of silly, but or at least seems silly at this point. Bikes trading off from both players. v0ddy pretending to go for an expansion is actually going to be selling off his MCV. Both players trading bikes back and forth. Dozen or so bikes heading up the left side of the map for Technique, continuing to just pump bikes. Not a whole lot of buggies, not the transition into Scorpion tanks that we sometimes see, but in a Black Hand mirror, the man with more bikes will be the victor, at least in some cases. Technique starting to get trashed up a little bit here. He will be able to bust through the defenses, but really, he doesn't have that many bikes actually left here. He's got about 4, and if v0ddy can micro well with his harvesters and get just a couple of more units out for the defense, which currently he can't, so that's actually going to be a big problem considering he doesn't actually have anything out on the field. He's forced to GG. He may have needed to sell off one of those war factories instead of trying to produce off of both of them and not actually getting anything out. And so with the early aggression, v0ddy not able to tie this game up nicely with a bow, and instead, Technique will be able to take it in just 5.5 minutes. But that is only game 1. Naturally, we do have game number 2 to jump right into, which takes us to Tournament Decision, a classic map for Kane's Wrath, and certainly one that has stood the test of time. In the bottom left-hand corner, we have the Cyan GDI, not going Refinery first. This is v0ddy. And of course, that makes sense on this map, while in the top right-hand corner playing now as Vanilla Nod, this is Technique. And of course, this is Tournament Decision, which means you've got 2 spikes per player, which is of course why it makes a lot more sense to actually go for the Engineers when you've pretty much guaranteed to get 2 Tib spikes. Why go Refinery first? And you can get out those Engineers. This is certainly something that hasn't really changed all that much. I know with the smashed version of this map, the Tib spikes did change quite a bit, so But when you're playing the original version, this is still what you see from a lot of players. Even some players do like to go for the split on the racks. Some players like to just drop 1 racks in the middle and then try to feed your Engineers out both ways. A little bit slower, but it's probably one of those cases where no matter which way you do, as long as you get both of those spikes, it's about the same economy. Maybe a guy like Master Lethal would actually crunch the numbers and figure out which way is more optimal. Maybe a guy like CGF, I don't know, but it's relatively similar. Harvester first, not even going for a buggy scout or anything like this. Both of these guys definitely have the opportunity to macro up and play this one out as a long game, considering this is Decision. You do start with a pretty nice, kind of, definitely a large field. Sometimes they're more considered medium, but kind of smallish fields for the expansion. Pitbull going to be showing up, getting a couple of shots off here. Of course, his stealth detection is actually going to be necessary in this particular case. MCV could be harassed a little bit here by the Pitbull, but the Pitbull mostly just wants to keep an eye on those Harvesters. And going to be able to do some pretty fair damage to just the 1 Harvester. Is going to be forcing out some sort of response from Technique, an extra power plant. He does need to keep his production online, as he's currently only just sitting at those 2 power plants before the expansion. Scorpion tank comes out, and the Harvester will remain safe for now. I'm curious if these guys are going to decide to draft up a 3rd refinery for this main field. You can go up to 3 refineries reasonably well. Command post has been spotted. The militant squad is probably also pretty close to being in vision of that airfield. v0ddy is going to be able to clean up the militant squad without too much trouble. Of course, Watchtower versus militant squad, not too much of a danger there. And the question is, will Technique put 1 and 1 together, the command post, and will he kind of figure out that Orcas are probably on the way in this particular case? Pitbull's also going to be streaming out across the map, and Technique is definitely going to need something to stand up against it. There's going to be the scan going down, and the first Orca going to be showing up to this battle to target down the Harvesters. Of course, the Harvester count going to be extremely important. Buggy's starting to target down the Orcas, and the Bike's going to be getting some nice shots off as well. Remember, every Orca is extremely costly, so if v0ddy doesn't make this worth it, he's going to have a hard time actually justifying the cost that he spent on all of those Orcas. With the Pitbulls going down, that's actually a lot of the kind of distraction for this particular force. The Orcas do manage to escape, at least for now. The Buggies, if they're able to catch up with them, won't take much to kill off that last Orca, as it is pretty darn low on HP. Still, like, what is this, 6 Harvesters out here for Technique? A really solid economy, really solid defense coming out from Technique. v0ddy is going to need to pull something else out from his sleeve. only just sitting on those 2 refineries, which isn't bad, but it's not quite as good as it could be. Bike buggy swarm potentially going to be coming in, and these orcas now going to be showing up. Do get some nice shots off. Some of the units were stacked a little bit there, but of course you got to kill a lot of bike buggy to really justify losing those orcas in that fashion. v0ddy has to be very careful. His more expensive units cannot trade out nearly as quickly as those easy bike buggy, which are, you know, they're reasonably justifiable in losing just because they're cheaper and low tier. Of course, it doesn't take that many of them to really stack up to the cost of the Orca straight up, but the Orca is the tier 2, and those Orcas taking some nice splash damage from the bike shots are going to be eliminated and completely shutting down that airfield. Really, Pitbull's going to be rolling up, but they can't stand up against this sheer numbers from Technique. v0ddy is going to be forced to pull back a little bit here. He's potentially going to be able to weaken and kind of shave off some of the Scorpion tank numbers, but if they really commit to this battle with reinforcements, Technique will end up winning this fight. v0ddy going to be forced to pull his Pitbulls back, and of course, he can potentially establish an economy down here in the south if he manages to squeeze out enough income for that. His main field is going to be drying up relatively soon, so he's always got that clock on him. How much can he actually keep this pressure up when it's not really doing the damage that he needed? 3 harvesters from Technique, relatively low on HP, 2 of them kind of dangerously low. A third one has taken a few hits, but it just goes to show that v0ddy has not been able to actually do the focused damage that he would like to. He should have been able to, you know, he potentially would have liked to have killed off a couple of those harvesters instead of just leaving 3 of them at half health or so. And as a result, Technique's economy is not as scathed as it should be, but it hasn't quite been able to just go unimpeded either. So some minor harassment was put on by v0ddy, but overall Technique has done a pretty good job of defending, and Orca's just going to be donating away. They do get the kill, I think, on like 1 bike, but really even the second bike, which was taking rockets, didn't actually go down, and now v0ddy has to deal with this force of bikes and buggies. And of course, bikes in these numbers focusing down Predator tanks are actually surprisingly effective, even though that in a 1-to-1 they of course would not do well. Orca Strike going to be coming down. A nice dodge there from Technique is going to be able to absorb a couple of shots, though, allowing the Predator tanks to get off maybe 1 or 2 final rounds. But v0ddy's army has mostly been evaporated. He has been able to hold the line, which is extremely important against a guy like Technique, wanting to put on a lot of pressure with fast bikes and buggies. Still no economy established in the south. The MCV definitely in an awkward position to try to do that with the kind of build radius. It would be less than optimal refinery placement. And sniping a Tib Spike, if you can, is always a good idea. MCV potentially going to be taking some damage. The Pitbulls are going to be forced to sacrifice their lives, and this isn't too many bikes left, but of course they're trading out quite well when the Pitbulls are coming in pretty much 1 by 1, and some of the Pitbulls even stacking, likely allowing that splash damage to do its dirty work. Technique, on the other hand, has he actually expanded on out from here? He has gone tier 3, which is definitely nice for him. His bike's going to be pulling back, and they will actually be spotted by that rifleman squad inside of the building, which actually they might have an opportunity to kill off this engineer. This engineer may actually signal v0ddy that, hey, it's probably an MCV cell coming out from Technique, which means, of course, v0ddy does need to be careful about an impending, pretty high-level attack. We got avatars now coming out. Ooh, the 1-clicks, which we haven't quite seen. Now, of course, in this case, Technique definitely wants to hit this refinery if he can. These refineries are of limited value for v0ddy. Shutting down that frontline economy is exactly what Technique wants. There's actually going to be the mortars coming out from the Pitbulls, which will indeed reveal that, hey, v0ddy is indeed tier 3. If these Pitbulls can't shut down this militant squad before they get vision on that refinery, then there could be some serious economic damage done to v0ddy. Technique also going to be revealing the tier 3 upgrades with those attack bikes. Tibcore missiles has indeed finished up, and, well, that's just a militant squad on the ramp there. Not too big of a deal. And oh my word, with these many harvesters stacking around just that 1 refinery, a Tib chemical, well, a Tib catalyst missile could be extremely potent. Avatars in the south should be able to deal with these Pitbulls without any trouble at all. Technique going to be pushing on south. He has definitely got the mechs on the roll. And once again, v0ddy is going to be just needing to hold this position. He does still have quite a bit of infrastructure back here, so he needs to keep the defense alive and keep himself safe from this direction. But really, his future economy is on this field and potentially even going to be stretching over here. Technique gearing up for potentially one big final assault. He's got the high-tech units that he needs. He's got, of course, lots of DPS heading in from the bikes, but very soon his economy is going to be pretty much nothing, as he's going to be forced to long-distance harvest from fields that are far away. Bikes going to be coming in. Of course, one Juggernaut here to lay down the damage from afar, but there's the Tib Catalyst missile that we were talking about, and of course, sniping down that refinery, sniping down so many harvesters is the key for Technique, stomping all over those missile squads, and he is going to be able to kill off the majority of the missile squads. A couple of Juggernauts are here on the back end. They're going to be trying to deal with these attack bikes. The attack bikes should be able to deal with potentially one or two of these Juggernauts before they actually get cleaned up, but no, they're forced to run away as the Avatar is going to be turned to v0ddy's side, and this attack for Technique is not going how he had planned. He is definitely going to have a difficult time actually breaking v0ddy in this position. He has damaged the economy, but he has not caught and killed v0ddy just yet. v0ddy dropping an additional refinery is going to be able to keep his hopes alive, at least for now. Technique, not a whole lot of army actually left for him. He's going to be pushing back in. A couple of bikes, some harvesters over on the right side of the map. And, of course, long-distance harvesting will provide him with enough lifeblood to stay in this game, but it is a less than ideal situation. Keeping the Tib chemical plant around, will decide to sell off his tier 3, though. Isn't going to be keeping that along any longer. I mean, he has purchased his Tib core missile, so he's at least got that upgrade going for him, and he doesn't necessarily want to invest too much more in avatars for at least the next couple of minutes. Juggernaut's moving out, but of course without support, they're going to have a bit of trouble actually taking too much stuff down, because as long as Technique can get bikes up close and personal, he can deal with the Juggernauts quite nicely. The problem is getting up close and personal. This Avatar, not a lot of HP left on it, and the Juggernaut's going to be spending some time actually trying to kill off just that one Tib spike and the bunker, which will take a little bit of time. Will slow down v0ddy a little bit. Actually, I guess he's going to be going for the capture on the Tib spike instead of the kill, which is probably the better choice. Bike's going to be heading in for Technique. He's again going to be going harvester hunting, and if he can snipe down these harvesters again, it is very nice for him to be able to do this. These are the important harvesters. It's not like he's just killing harvesters with no Tiberium or harvesters that aren't very important. Does trade out quite a few bikes for it, though. Not actually sure if that was very cost-effective for Technique to do. v0ddy pretty much only losing one harvester, and not really taking very much damage considering how many of those bikes he actually just killed. v0ddy managing to stay alive with the power of GDI. Reduced down to one refinery, but of course this field's starting to regrow. You do always want to keep that one harvester just pecking away at that Tib field, just constantly bringing in that little bit of money. Oh, no. Tib Vane detonation now going to be firing off one harvester down. A second one may be killed as well, and a third barely escapes, but it does some good damage. Snipes down both an Avatar and a Juggernaut that were under the control of v0ddy. Technique with the one clicks, somehow able to try to keep himself in this game. Long-distance harvesting, probably still hasn't actually rebuilt that MCV, which he could have done if he had really wanted to at this point. Sells off the Tib chemical plant, calls in the Seed Tiberium just before that, and of course, he's pulling out pretty much every trick that he can to try to get his life back on the line. One Juggernaut goes down, and of course, they can be, well, reclaimed for the cheap price of 500 credits, which is, of course, a bargain considering the original price. But v0ddy now with two Avatars just needs to hold the line against the bikes, and really, no actual buggies are here to assist. It's just bikes and a single Avatar. Black Hand squads continuing to just kind of trickle in one at a time. Every time, pretty much, Technique sells off a building, he sends in a Black Hand squad. There's two Avatar husks, which are pretty much ripe for the taking for v0ddy, at least. Technique not really going to have the opportunity to kill those off. One does get reclaimed. The other husk will likely be reclaimed by v0ddy in just a couple of moments. No, it does get sniped down very nicely by Technique. Will decide to focus fire his own husk. Rifleman ends up going down. He was alone in this world, didn't have really anything to live for, let's be honest. The MCV still stands for v0ddy. He's actually had to sell off the majority of his main base, even his Tier 3. He's kept that Tier 2 alive, so he does still have the command post. He can, of course, build Grenadiers, which I believe he's constructed at least a couple of them. Didn't quite ever get up to those EMP grenades, but he hasn't necessarily needed them in this particular game. Just been a lot of just fast attack units, attack bikes coming in from different angles. EMP grenades, not necessarily the best option. Technique, once again, has found the numbers to somehow come out with this many bikes. Walk up here, trash down a couple of harvesters, trash down at least like just one avatar. However, this Juggernaut is indeed vulnerable, and somehow v0ddy's army is just falling to absolute pieces to just attack bike wave after attack bike wave, as they're actually going to be able to focus down the Predator tanks. With 2 Scorpion tanks left, this may be enough for Technique to hold the ground. Snipes down the Avatar, and unfortunately for him, he doesn't actually have a Hand of Nod to reclaim that, but the last Predator tank goes down, and it's pretty much just down to the last few infantry squads, a Grenadier squad, a couple of rocket squads, and not a whole lot left for v0ddy in terms of an actual standing army. He is going to reclaim a couple of the husks. It looks like there's just one here. His economy continually just sacrificed. I think he's only had this one harvester, which is really the only economy that he's been having that hasn't been harassed pretty regularly by Technique, and Technique somehow clawing his way back into an actually all-right situation in this game. Actually, v0ddy has been sitting on at least 2 spikes for a little while. He lost this one a little while ago, but he has been sitting on those 2 spikes for quite some time. That's a fair bit of income that he has been dealing with. And of course, these Scorpion tanks going to be getting pushed back. Unfortunately for v0ddy, he hasn't actually had a War Factory kind of on the front lines. He's only had the ones back here to really get the healing power up on these avatars. Hasn't quite been able to get them back up to that full health at pretty much any time. Stealth detection from the Pitbull is going to be revealing the harvesters, but that opens up an opportunity for Technique to step forward. Will be able to snipe down that avatar once again, and of course, without his MCV and without the without the Hand of Nod, the husks themselves are of limited value. It might actually be better just to kill off the husks rather than chancing v0ddy reclaim them. v0ddy simply doesn't have any units. He's got hardly any units out on the map, and not a lot of them are actually here for the defense. Does manage to pull together a couple of Predator tanks. The bikes not wanting to sacrifice themselves just yet. They're going to be waiting until the Scorpion tanks do show up to help them deal with the Predator tanks. And really, the Scorpion tanks just need to absorb shots. The real problem is going to be trying to deal with these missile squads, as they will deal pretty reasonably with the bikes if they're inside of that bunker. v0ddy going to be once again pushing Technique away. And this last refinery, will it actually still stand? It looks like, yes, for now, it will stand. v0ddy will keep those refineries alive. Not that they're really doing anything, or they have really been doing anything for very long. Technique may need to start mixing it up once again, hitting from 2 fronts at once, which is quite difficult considering that he's got hardly any units. Both of these guys have been playing on pretty low economy for quite a while in this game. Pretty low unit numbers as well, and Technique has somehow, someway, pretty much found a way to just keep up the pressure, keep attacking on almost every front. And ooh, that's 500 credits burned on a scan. Will he get a harvester for his troubles? It looks like the answer is yes, is able to snipe it down. And of course, keep in mind there is a heroic rocket squad in there, but one refinery does get sold off, and the War Factory as well, which will allow Technique to just move on from there with his bikes. He's actually going to be sniping down the power plants, which is, you know, almost always a good choice. Sniping down power plants is generally a good idea. Sometimes there are better value targets that you can go for, but forcing the sell-off of the Tier 2 as well, that command post going down, is certainly annoying. v0ddy wasn't necessarily using it all that much, but certainly selling off infrastructure is never something that you want to do. 2 harvesters full of Tiberium going to be refining it for v0ddy, and Technique, either take the tower or snipe the tower. Make your choice. He indeed does go for snipe in this particular case. Long-distance harvesting. It may be inefficient, but it is something. This is actually a fair few Scorpion tanks moving out for Technique. He does have to deal with rocket squads. That's the primary damage output from v0ddy. And the first War Factory to actually be built in quite some time by v0ddy. He has managed to stick around in this game, pretty much just streaming in reinforcements from over here. But now that this base is pretty much completely gone, Technique only has to worry about attacking this one location, and if he's able to pull the army out of position, he might be able to mount a counterattack with some bikes. We're not actually sure where the bikes are. They're down here in the south. 5 bikes or so going to be pushing in, sniping down that power plant. A couple of rocket squads going to be here trying to hold the line. He may be able to split a couple of them off into the bunker and the buildings. That might allow them to do a bit more damage. Of course, Technique would be able to take down those structures without a huge amount of trouble. The bunker will definitely be harder to take down, but the MCV is back up and running. Somehow Technique has long-distance harvested enough Tiberium to build this many Scorpion tanks and reconstruct his MCV. The force is moving forward for v0ddy. Does he actually have enough to finish off Technique? It's definitely going to be close whichever way it swings, but v0ddy is definitely needing to be very careful with every move that he makes. His rifleman squad in the north gets crushed. We'll be able to see that the MCV is deploying, and of course, Technique ordinarily wouldn't necessarily want to expand up north, but in this case, where v0ddy can't really easily take control of this field, it's definitely not that big of a deal. Technique always looking for the alternate angles. He's going to be pushing back out with some bikes. Again, those 5 kind of hero bikes that have been around for so long into this game. They may actually end up forcing v0ddy's hand. If he moves a bit too far forward, he may be forced to commit to an engagement that he doesn't actually want to. And if he's forced into a base trade by Technique, well, Technique pulls the bikes back in the north. He's looking for the fight in the south. There's, of course, a heroic rocket squad, a couple of veteran ones as well, maybe going elite relatively soon. 1 Scorpion tank getting shaved off. Divide and conquer, such an important concept for both of these guys when they're playing up against low-income opponents. Ooh, that Shredder turret definitely going to be messing with v0ddy's forces a little bit there. v0ddy going to be trading away 1 Pitbull. If Technique is careful, he won't actually lose a bike. He ends up losing a bike, trades it out for an elite status on another bike. And the first refinery going up in the north, such an important step for Technique. He's going to get his economy actually back online without just utilizing long-distance harvesters. And that is definitely important for both of these players, as they have just battered at each other until they're almost dead, and then both of them rebuilding just barely, bit by bit, trying to reconstruct what they once had. With the help of this secondary field, v0ddy will be able to get his economy back online. Technique in the north, a little bit oversaturated with just that 1 refinery. Actually, one of the harvesters going to be, by default, heading back all the way to the main base. And I suppose Technique could actually sell off one of these refineries if he really wanted to. Extra 500 bucks is not too bad. And there's still a fair amount of infantry down here. It's like 4 or 5 rocket squads that are here, as well as a couple of pit bulls, which the pit bulls starting to get picked off. v0ddy lining up his Predator tanks in a blockade to kind of block off that first choke point, but without really enough units to move out and simply win the game, v0ddy is going to be hard-pressed to actually do anything other than just try to rebuild on this 1.5 field of Tiberium that he's got. Regrowth is, of course, going to be very important, and v0ddy may eventually be able to sort of expand back over to his main base. Not necessarily worth it right now, but eventually that may become a viable option. Pitbull's heading out along the left side. Of course, if he's able to stay active with his forces, he may be able to find an opening in Technique's armor. He may be able to find a weak spot in the defense and actually move forward to claim victory. But for now, Technique is doing a good job, you know, kind of taking a book out of the cheap defense book, taking a page out of that cheap defense book, which does say build rocket troopers because they're pretty good defense and they're relatively cheap. Of course, the mortar upgrade for pit bulls does allow them to actually clear up infantry relatively cost-effectively. And in this case, they're doing a pretty good job going to be sniping down one of the harvesters. Killing one harvester is probably not actually enough, considering there's still 4 more that do survive, and I think it was just 2 pit bulls that have actually gone down here, as we do have Scorpion tanks now going to be showing up, going to be lending their firepower to this battle. Those buildings, you may actually be able to garrison them, but of course with their weakened state, it's not actually going to be that helpful. v0ddy garrisoning up one of these structures with 3 rocket squads will provide him with a little bit of extra firepower should an engagement take place near that choke point. v0ddy constantly stationing some forces here just to guard against those attack bikes after he was ravaged so many times by the attack bikes of Technique. And what a game this has turned into. I've never seen these games, and sometimes some of the older Kane's Wrath and Tib Wars games in tournaments were actually over quite quickly just because of how accelerated the economy was and how aggressive some of the players are. But in this particular case, the aggression has actually given way to more of an awkward macro game from these guys where it never really got up to that full, like, 2.5 base economy that these guys would have necessarily been looking for, and instead it's turned into this low eco slugfest for over 20 minutes as Mine's going to be coming in directly on top of v0ddy's forces as Scorpion Tank's pushing forward with the Dozer Blade upgrade so late into the game, but they're crushing through absolutely everything. The Armory coming up and possibly Composite Armor finishing up way too late as v0ddy has been defeated, and in one swell swoop, in one fell swoop is what I meant to say, Technique walks over v0ddy in the last couple of moments of that game, crushing through the primary army of v0ddy. v0ddy thought he was so clever going for a bit of harassment on the opposite side of the map, but Technique went straight for the jugular and was able to kill v0ddy 2-0 to advance on to the finals. And that is very weird that I don't have to preface the next game by saying, oh man, v0ddy's up against the ropes. He was already up against the ropes, and now it's over. Technique advances on to the finals, but of course the next question is, who will join him in the finals of Ladder Season 3? We are taking a trip down memory lane with these series, but we are going to be jumping into all of them, so of course thank you all very much for watching. I will see you in the next video, and this is Sybert, signing out.